Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Pearson's Digital Learning Now. Today's webinar is Why Corruption is the Largest Problem in the World and How Ethics in Education are the Paths Forward. Before we begin, I'd like to point out a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded, so all lines have been automatically muted. We encourage you to ask questions at any time. Please add your questions to the Q&A box. If you are unable to answer your questions during the allotted time, we will follow up with you after the webinar. Captions have been enabled, and you may turn them on or off at the bottom of your screen. For those of you interested in professional development, we will be offering digital badges to everyone attending today's live session. With that being said, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Jay Albanese. Jay is professor in the Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University. He received the PhD from the School of Criminal Justice at Rutgers University. Dr. Albanese served as chief of the International Center at the National Institute of Justice, the research arm of the U.S. Department of Justice. He is the author and editor of 22 books and more than 100 journal articles and book chapters on the issues of organized crime, corruption, ethics, transnational crime, and criminal justice. He has served as consultant to the U.S. National Office on Drugs and Crime and is a past president and fellow of the Academy of Criminal Justice Science. Thank you for being here today. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, and I welcome everybody here, and I appreciate you taking the time. What will occur now will take a very little of your time, where I will do a brief presentation of perhaps 15 minutes or so, and then there will be a Q&A session after that, and the entire webinar will be completed in about 30 minutes. And I get to talk about something interesting today, and you get to ask questions about it. And of course, the big question is, of course, and I am arguing here, why corruption is the largest problem in the world, and of course, what to do about it. And the first question that we have to ask ourselves entering a new year especially is, of course, what are the largest problems in the world? And believe it or not, people have given a great deal of thought to this, simply because you want to make sure you devote time and resources to the most important problems and not the least important. Perhaps the best known and the most representative are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which they always capture over a period of 15 years, in which we are in the middle of those 15 years right now. And they came up with 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the UN is comprised of 193 member nations, which is pretty much the entire planet. So these were negotiated in terms of what the representatives of the member states of planet Earth decided which are the most important problems facing the planet right now, at least between 2016 and 2030. And you see on the left side of the screen the ranking of all those problems. And they made them into goals, but you can see the underlying problems: poverty, hunger, health, quality education, that's important certainly to many of you, gender equality, clean water, clean energy, work, economic growth, infrastructure, reducing inequality, sustainable cities, responsible consumption, climate, life in the water, life on land, in terms of sustainability, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnership, international partnership to achieve these goals. When you look at these list here, what makes this list compelling is that this isn't a list developed by, university professors or people on the street. These are representatives of all the countries in the world. So these are truly what we have to call, have been identified as the largest problems in the world. Anyway, when you look at that list, the first thing you should think of, well, how did we get these problems? How did we get here? How did they become the big problems. And of course, the first thing you might notice is that every single one of these problems was not pre-existing. That is, we either created the problems or pushed the problems to a crisis point by the decision of human beings, right? All of these became big problems due to decisions of humans. And many of these were bad decisions, acts or omissions that resulted from, ignorance, selfishness, or corruption. So essentially, when you look at the largest problems in the world, my point is how they became the biggest problems in the world was because of the poor choices and decisions that were made worse by corruption. But a lot of us are interested in education as well. And the question always becomes, okay, well, if corruption is a major driver, arguably the most important driver of the largest problems in the world, how can we make it better? And you look here at this chart taken from the Corruption Perceptions Index, which is a global, based on global surveys. This is learning adjusted years of schooling. So it's not just years of schooling, it's years of schooling standardized by test scores, because some schooling is better than other schooling. But in any case, you see the corruption index is inverse. But the point is, as corruption, as education increases, corruption decreases. So education does make a difference when you look globally. Up at the top of the screen are here, look at my pointer. At the top of the screen, these are lower corruption countries. These are higher corruption countries. These are higher education per capita, and these are lower education per capita. So you put them on a scattergram, and you can see as education goes up, corruption goes down. So there is a link. And what we have to figure out is, well, how do we make that link, work for us? So let me share some good news, because it is a new year. So let me give you some good news. First of all, 2 items of good news. Here's one. When you look at global illiteracy, or global literacy, if you take the converse, here, starting from 1820, when we first started looking at these things, to the current day, the rate at which people are literate has gone up dramatically. All right. The illiterate, you can see now, it's over 80% globally of people on planet Earth can read and write. And I have this little line in the middle. Why is that there? That's the end of World War II and the establishment of the United Nations. And why that's important, the United Nations was formed right after World War II to keep countries talking. They meet regularly. And the point is that enables things like the exercises before. They start focusing on problems that everybody shares. And one of the problems was illiteracy. You look at the end of World War II, only about 40% of the world would be considered literate. Now it's up to over 80%. There's been dramatic increases. A lot of this due is international attention, focus, technical assistance, and priority put on the issue itself. So you see what the how important that is. So that's very good news. All right, and I've got one more slide of good news. The percentage of the population with no formal education has correspondingly dropped like a rock. This is from 1970, projected out to 2050. So the share of the global population, and these lines, these are just picked out by various countries. And if you ever want to look up this data is warehoused in our World of Data, which is managed by Oxford University in the UK. Anyway, the point of it is the share of the global population without formal education has been dropping dramatically. And of course, that contributes to the earlier slide. Literacy has improved dramatically. So when you talk to your friends and you say, I'm looking for some good news, tell them global literacy has never been higher. Global formal education has never been higher. But the problem is corruption. Despite those significant increases in literacy, in formal education, what we don't have is when you look at corruption prevalence scores, and this is measured in several different ways. There's a corruption perceptions index. There's the global corruption barometer, which measures businesses, and there's also surveys of citizens around the world. Here's one from 2010. This data is housed at the UN, but a number of people gather it. These are, the countries showing the prevalence of bribery. The darker the color, the more bribery. And you can see here's 2010, and here's 2021. So the issue is here, and this is from a Transparency International, more than 2/3 of the countries score below 50. So the closer you get to 100, the lower your corruption. And they said the data show, despite some progress, most countries are failing to make serious inroads in corruption, even though we're making great inroads into literacy and education. So the takeaway message is at the bottom of that slide. Literacy is getting better, schooling is getting better, but corruption is getting worse. So I'm going to make an argument to fix that. All right, here we go. Just one quick slide here, just to show that, corruption is not sort of a vague notion. It's a very, very specific thing. There's work that I've done with a colleague of mine. We make the argument that really all corruption is one of these 8 different variations based, bribery, extortion, fraud, embezzlement, official misconduct, obstruction of justice, violation of regulatory laws. But anyway, the question, so my point is corruption is not something, vague or obtuse. It's really kind of a specific set of behaviors and that, undermine government and business and work against the interest of civil society, regular people. So the question here is at the bottom of the slide. Why aren't we making better progress against unethical conduct and corruption in general when we have record numbers of people who can read and write and record numbers of people going to school? Well, that leads to the next question. And the question becomes, well, we saw earlier, if education makes a difference for corruption, that if you look country by country, well, what should be taught? Maybe that's what makes the difference. And what you see here, when you look at most compulsory education, it focuses on history, math, science, language in various ways. Skills, which are all important, obviously, but dramatically less emphasis on how to evaluate facts, how to make decisions. That is, looking forward issues. History, math, science, and language are crucial, and they teach you skills to work effectively in society, but they don't help you in making decisions. And what this slide is pointing out, we need more than facts to develop a disposition toward ethical decisions. And that, of course, then has to be followed by the courage to act ethically when you're in a situation where people are pushing you not. And the quote from Aristotle, by doing just acts, That's how you produce the just person. So education is focused on facts and skills rather than on decisions. And this is why we see so many examples around the world of very well-educated, accomplished people making terrible decisions. So what I'm arguing for here is a three-part effort. Because what is missing in our educational process is, where do we create an ethical disposition? Where do we develop ethical principled outlook about what is your obligation to other people? All right. A subject that does not come up often enough in education at any level. What is your obligation to strangers? What is your obligation to people on the other side of the planet? What is your obligation to anybody? And that's what ethics is about. Then, if you develop a principled outlook about your obligation to others, then it's easier then to develop the courage to act. That is, you would have a higher resistance to selfish acts as opposed to selfless acts. You become less tolerant of people who are corrupt and not developing a principled outlook about their obligations to others. And then, if you have more people with an ethical disposition creating to less selfish behavior, your measures of rule of law will improve, because there will be less self-seeking behavior, because people will do just acts. So my point here is at the bottom of the slide. We're not stuck with the ethical conduct of our day. We tend to rate the ethics of people very low, but we're not stuck with the current situation that we have. So how do we accomplish this? Here's a suggestion. When we talk about corruption and ethics, there's an emphasis on structural reforms, which are very important, but not dispositive. Structural reforms are things like more transparency in procurement, more oversight to prevent theft and fraud, more laws to hold people accountable. All that's very important stuff. But that is not sufficient. It's not sufficient because even where structural reforms are high, and the US, for example, is ranked as a very high ranking country for the number of structural reforms it has to make corruption difficult, we still have a very large share of corruption. And that's true in many other countries. So what we need is structural reforms plus, our plus sign, ethics education and training. Because here is where, through ethical education and training, you learn to identify when you're faced with an ethical choice, and you learn how to develop a principled response. That's how you get individual accountability. That's how you get people who are fact smart to learn how to make decisions in difficult situations. And ethical decisions underlie every non-corrupt environment, always. So you look at the bottom here, civic and ethics education is the responsibility of academia, public and private sector, non-governmental organizations. And it's always designed to promote non-selfish views toward your own interest, your own profit, your own position is no more important than anyone else's. So just a few more things here to wrap up. So here's one other way to look at the overarching point I'm making. We start with the world's largest problems, and I used the UN's Sustainable Development Goals as example of a list. All right, and then when you look at those problems from poverty on down, you see, boy, corruption, that is self-seeking conduct, has created or made worse every single one of these problems, from water pollution through to inequality. And when you see this, okay, if this is true, which I think the data is there to show, Well, what underlies these decisions, what underlies every corrupt decision is an unethical decision. Ethic lies at the core of all corrupt conduct. The way to reduce that is through ethics education, training, and accountability. So my message to my students when I teach ethics is that, hey, if you want to make a difference in the world, you want to address the largest problems. And the one thing all the largest problems have in common is corruption. And the one thing all corrupt actions have in common is unethical conduct. Okay, to summarize, my last slide. Starting at the beginning, we have this is the list again of the Sustainable Development Goals identified by the world's countries. Here's the list of the biggest problems in the world. All right. The argument being made here is that there's been a number of structural changes that have been made involving transparency, new laws, accountability. All right. Those are all very, very important. But what we have found is that this corrupt people will exploit both corrupt and non-corrupt environments. If people have a disposition to behave corruptly, they will circumvent the structural changes. So structural changes are important. Corrupt people exist. How do we reduce this pool of corrupt people who will exploit opportunities for selfish action rather than selfless action, or actions, on behalf of others, in the interest of others? And that's through ethics education, training, and reinforcement to get more principled decisions and more intolerance for people who engage in selfish acts, whether it's government, business, or in private life. All right, well, where does this education going to come from? It's going to come from civil society, and that's academia, it's non-governmental organizations, that's faith-based organizations, private sector. They can all be sources for this change. And I think that is our responsibility certainly in the education sector, to say, hey, we can directly impact all of the world's largest problems, even though many of us don't know about the details of these problems because we're not experts in a number of these areas. But if you know something about ethics and something about corruption, you say, we can make a significant progress in reducing all of these problems if we follow a path that leads to certainly structural changes, which have been ongoing. That's a whole separate talk on that. But how to reduce the pool of people disposed to making corrupt decisions, and that's through ethics education, training, and reinforcement. And I will end there, and I'm happy to entertain any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay, for sharing your valuable content today. We have had some questions come in for you. Let's
Sure.
start with, in academic terms, how can higher education institutions contribute more effectively to better student understanding of ethics and make ethical decisions in their professional lives?
Yes, I think we could do a better job in the educational sector. Too often we see ethics, if it is required at all, it's taught by the philosophy department. I have a number of philosophers who are very good friends, but too often it's taught as a subject rather than as a decision-making tool. I am a strong proponent that we need ethics courses in substantive areas. We need ethics courses specifically in accounting, in law, in criminal justice, in nursing, in medicine, and really every area of the curriculum, simply because you need the case studies to bring it to life. If you're just taking a generic ethics course, there's only so much an instructor can do. But if I'm teaching a course in ethics in criminal justice, every single one of my examples is a criminal justice example to show that whether you're a legislator, police officer, corrections officer, in probation, victim services, wherever you are, there are ethical decisions that have to be made and ethical dilemmas to be faced. So I would argue that requiring ethics within substantive majors is crucial if you want people in the workplace as professionals to make more ethical decisions.
Thank you. We have had a couple similar questions, so I'm going to try and consolidate them in the interest of time. How do you see integrating education about ethics into the school curriculum? And at what age or grade do you believe is the right moment to start teaching ethics and corruption?
Yeah, that's very good. People, including some of the ancient Greek philosophers, said that ethics is wasted on the young. And what they were saying with tongue in cheek is that once you've had experience with dealing with the ups and downs of life and in making difficult decisions, you're much more prone to benefit from them. I taught a course to state police officers a few years back, and that was one of the best classes I've ever taught because I would talk about principles and case studies, and their life experience was so rich with difficult decisions. It just brought it home to them and to everybody else. So it's if you will look for those of you who are in instruction, I did some work for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, which is based in Vienna, Austria. And if you go online, I worked on university modules, but there's modules now for primary school, secondary school, and university level modules. Most of them deal with issues. They're separate. So separate courses were made open access to improve the education issue that I mentioned early in the presentation. But two of the modules in this 15 module, these are selections of courses that you can pick and choose whatever you want out of it. I mean, there's pedagogical materials, there's PowerPoints, everything is in there, and it's open access to anybody on planet Earth with an internet connection. But you should look in there because they actually have anti-corruption and integrity modules for elementary school kids. Because you will find you don't have to have your own child to realize that you have to teach people how to not push other people to get in line, and all the so it kind of starts small in primary school, but in secondary school and others, there is certainly curriculum out there, and to me, to teach a long series of facts in all grades is a disservice because the facts are important, the skills are important, but they don't help you make decisions in the field as a working professional later on. And that's what ethics does.
Thank you. This will be our last question. Do you have an ethics requirement at your university? And if so, how do you provide that to all your students?
Yes, there is a global ethics requirement. I teach in a criminal justice program, and it's funny, we have a required course in both our undergraduate curriculum and our master's curriculum that deals specifically with ethics. And believe it or not, the graduate course came out of a scandal where a student was found, this is many years ago, was found to hand in the same paper in two different classes. And the student's defense at the time was, I didn't know that was wrong, that you couldn't do that. Now, there was, hearings and all this nonsense. So, but I held a one-day retreat. I was department chair at the time. One-day retreat, and I just put one word, ethics, on the agenda. What should we do? We're training people to be professionals in the field. We can't have this. Anyway, we ended up recommending the establishment of an ethics course, which we still have today. And then on the undergraduate level, the same thing. We had to add a course to our curriculum due to state curriculum guidelines, and we had a faculty conversation. And my contribution was, well, do our students need more criminal justice, or content, or do they need other kinds of skills? And after some long discussions, we decided to add a course, we call it Ethics and Decision Making in Criminal Justice, that we've added to the curriculum. And it's just for students, because in criminal justice, like a number of other fields, but especially criminal justice, all the professionals in the field have the liberty interests of others as part of their daily routine. So the decisions they make just don't affect themselves. They affect a lot of other people, and oftentimes people who are very, very vulnerable. So it's very important to have ethical decisions being made throughout criminal justice.
Well, thank you again, Jay, and thank you to all of you who have joined us live today. For those who have asked about today's webinar recording, I will be sharing that in a follow-up email in the coming days. We'd also like to ask that you share your feedback by completing a brief survey that will appear at the end of the webinar. As a reminder, those digital badges will be awarded to those who have attended live. These are sent at the end of each month. On behalf of Pearson, thank you again for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.